Most disturbing, scary, or creepy real story. Story 1. A few years ago, I was walking through the woods off the beaten track a bit, and I smelt this really overpowering sweet smell. Being nosy, I pulled back the undergrowth to have a look and found a dead body. The guy had clearly been there a while and wasn't looking great, all swollen and green and black with various runny bits. The local wildlife had also been dining well for a few days. I called the police, who told me to wait with the body until they arrived. Being in the middle of nowhere, it took a while for them to arrive, and it got dark, and I just sat there in the dark with him for a long time. It turned out he had committed suicide. For a long time afterwards, I had dreams about him, and he would talk to me, and not nice things. Mainly about how he was angry I had disturbed his resting place, and he wanted me to kill myself. Probably just my imagination, but all pretty disturbing at the time. He still turns up in my dreams from time to time, and no doubt will be tonight after typing this. Story 2. About 2 years ago, I was driving home from a family reunion pretty late at night, and the drive was about 2 hours. I didn't stay the night because I had to be back for work the following day. Most of the drive was on roads with dense bushes and trees on either side, the real creepy ones you see a lot in movies. Anyway, I had been driving about 45 minutes, and I was starting to get really tired. You know how sometimes you just suddenly become really tired, out of nowhere? Well, yeah, that happened to me. I knew I wasn't going to last, but I didn't come across any place that I felt I could park and safely sleep. Anyway, after it became clear to me that I wasn't going to find a place to pull up, and my tiredness wasn't going away, I did something very questionable. I pulled over to the side of the road onto the grass, behind some bushes, to try and hide my car from anybody else who was going to come past. The roads weren't empty. I came across another car every few minutes or so. I made a mental note that the time was 11:22, and then fell asleep. Sometime later, I was awoken by a scratching sound. I looked at the clock, 11:50. The sound stopped after a few seconds, and because I was still extremely tired, I didn't bother looking around and simply went back to sleep. I was later awoken by the same sound, and it was now 12:40. This time it really freaked me out because the sound didn't stop. The thought ran across my mind that it was just an animal inspecting the car, but why would it return almost an hour after it had left the previous time? I looked in my rearview mirror and just managed to catch a glimpse of something running away into the forest. Now, at the time, I thought it was the damn hook killer. You know, the one that scratched that couple's car and then slaughtered the guy when he got out to investigate? Fuck that, I thought to myself, so I got the hell out of there. There was a bend no more than 100 yards up the road, and as I came around it, there was a fucking car parked off to the side of the road with the driver's side door opened. I slowed down just to look to see if anyone was in there. There wasn't. Then I looked in my rear view mirror. I didn't see anything, and all of a sudden, this guy comes sprinting around the corner. He starts screaming at me, shouting stuff like, hey you, get the fuck out of your car. Now. I noped the fuck out of there and sped off. I never saw the guy again. Moral of the story? Don't fucking sleep on the side of a deserted road. Story 3. A few summers ago, I went for a bike ride around midnight with a friend. We went our separate ways at the end of the evening, and I had about 2 blocks to ride back by myself. Because of construction, I had to ride on the sidewalk, but the streets were dead, but it wasn't a problem until right where I was about to turn left onto my street. There was this man walking by himself, maybe 40s, a little scruffy but not homeless. The sidewalk was narrow, and I didn't want to freak him out, so when I got about 6 feet behind him, I said, "Hey, behind you." And he turned around and gave me this super angry look. I turned down my street, and he started to follow me, literally screaming about how I was a fucking cunt and he was going to kill me and all that. I live right off the corner and I didn't want him to figure that out, so I decided to do another loop around the block. That's not the scary part. The scary part is that when I looped back around and looked down the street, I saw him standing on my fucking front stoop, staring out at the street like the motherfucker knew I lived there. He saw me ride by again, but he didn't say anything. I ended up going back to the friends, but my bike got stolen from the alleyway by the house 2 days later. Edit. The guy in question was definitely not actually homeless. We have a large population of mentally ill in that area, unfortunately, downtown of a medium-sized city, so if I didn't think the sidewalk was too narrow to pass otherwise, I wouldn't have disturbed him. Half the scary part was that he looked pretty much completely normal for my area. That being said, I ended up texting my mom, and she made the decision not to notify law enforcement until my bike was stolen. Story 4. I had awesome parents who let me sleep in the living room on weekend nights when I was very young because my sister was a light sleeper and I could stay up until dawn. But of course, I always end up sleeping on the couch because Nick at night made me tired. So, one night I woke up to a prickly feeling, like an instinct, just bolted into a sitting position and stared out the front window. We lived in rural Georgia, so you can imagine the magnitude of trees. In perfect light cast from the moon, I see a silhouette of someone in this fucking tree. The family dog dashes to the window and is snarling into the glass. Terrified, I ran into my parents' room and tried to explain to my parents that there was a strange person outside. Dad grabs something defensive and darts outside with the dogs to beat the wax off the hothead. I tremble in Mama's arms until Dad comes home and says he saw no one and to go to bed. I decided to sleep in my regular bedroom. I fill in my sister in as to what happened. Dad is making regular rounds in the house with a cup of coffee. We're all still and I finally think I can sleep. Nope. I notice the man outside my window. From what I can see in the moonlight, he gives me a shush signal and runs away. Just turn around to run a straight line away. I swear I couldn't stop crying for what felt like hours. Story 5. My house sits further back in the lot than most other houses. It is a strange layout as well. The sidewalk runs the length of the living room and ends at the front porch, which leads into the living room. Large windows that do not open allow great light to get into the living room, but at the cost of no privacy. The rest of my family was on vacation, and having the house to myself, I decided I would get smashed. Well, I passed out on the couch in the living room at about 9 when I realized I was too scared to walk back to my room. The couch is right underneath these big windows. I woke up suddenly, not knowing why. I had a severe case of the chills, and I could not figure out why. Then the banging started. It came from right above me. I did not move, but I opened my eyes and looked up at the window. Someone was standing there, pounding on the glass. Without moving, I looked at the cable box. It was around 3 in the morning. The banging continues. Then it stopped suddenly, but I still did not move. Suddenly it commences again, coming from 2 different directions now. Someone is banging on the window, and another person is banging on the front door. They kept doing it and would not go away. Finally, after about 40 minutes, they quit. It was the most terrifying event I can recall at the moment. It made me a nervous wreck after that. I called a friend the next day to see if he would come over and stay for the rest of the week, and his response was, "What the fuck for? So that we can both be murdered in our sleep. Thanks a lot, asshole." Story 6. I was 17 and had just gotten my license. Back in high school, my friends and I had made it a mission to find abandoned houses to throw parties in. We had a few good candidates, but the motherlode was this house I would pass on my home from work. It was an undeveloped shell of a huge home with a large property in the back. I had told one of my friends about it, and one day before we went to see a movie, I took him to the house. It was about dusk in summer, so I had my headlights on. I pulled into the front of the house, and we were there for like 10 seconds tops before we pulled back to go to the main road. A minute later, this big truck pulls up behind us with its high beams on and riding our ass. My friend and I took note of it, but paid it no mind as we headed back to the main road. At the light, I turned right, but the truck cut through the gas station at the corner and blocked us off. Out of the truck comes this big hulk of a man, and my friend and I are shitting our pants. He raps on the window and I roll it down. Now, the really freaky part is that this is a busy road and now there was no one in sight. He asked us what we were doing at the house, and I quickly lied and said we were making a U-turn. He stares at us for a few seconds, smiles, and sends us on our way. To this day, the house remains unfinished, and I'm convinced it's a drug operation of some sort. TLDR, don't go into abandoned houses, man. Story 7. When I was about 10, all of my cousins and siblings were over. About 10 of us there. The parents and grandparents were out for an adult dinner. So it was just the kids sitting around watching a few movies when all of a sudden the house shook and there was a large flash coming from the backyard. It felt as if a bomb dropped. We all heard, felt, and saw it, and as a pack we ran into the hallway. The eldest cousins in the group debated on calling the police, but opted to call the parents. After a few minutes, we gained our courage and ventured out into the living room again, this time with weapons, just in case. After a half hour with no other issues, the parents came home and thought we were insane. There was nothing wrong with the backyard and no neighbors reported anything. It's been 10 years and we still talk about it, trying to figure out what it was. That has been the scariest thing to happen to me by far. Story 8. Okay, so this happened to me last summer when I was back at my parents' house during the holidays. It was around 3 a.m. and I was in my room on my computer when I got a call from my sister. Now that was already a little bit weird since my sister's room is just down the hallway from mine and she could have just come into my room. I went to pick it up and the call ended as soon as I reached the phone. I figured that she wanted to speak with me, so I got up and went to her room. As soon as I reached her door, she started screaming that someone was in the room with her, so I busted in and of course nobody was there. After she stopped crying, she told me that she woke up and saw a dark shadow just centimeters from her face, and that's when she screamed. So I told her that she called me. She told me that her phone was not in her room and that she was sleeping. Sure enough, her phone is actually downstairs in her purse. The weird part is that I have the log of her call on my phone, but she doesn't. Never managed to explain this one. Story 9. I was delivering a hot tub to this contractor/realtor in this fancy gated community near Branson, Missouri. When I arrived, the construction workers were in charge of telling me where the thing was supposed to go. It was going on the 4th floor balcony, but because of the way the house was built, the 4th floor was ground floor. The other 3 floors were on the side of a hill, but the driveway was even with the first 4th floor entrance, if that makes sense. So, a lot of construction going on, but to get the hot tub on the balcony, I had to make a ramp, take it from the drive, down into the yard, up a ramp to the porch, through the living room door, across the living room, out the back patio doors onto the deck. Problem with this was, the deck was unfinished. A huge section of decking was missing. They had literally installed only enough decking so that I could go from the patio doors to the far corner of the deck where the hot tub would sit. There was no railing. The hot tub weighed 900 pounds and it was a 4-story drop if I fell. The construction workers volunteered to help me. We got it out onto the deck, crossed the narrow bridge of installed decking to the corner, and I was about to lay it down. You move these on a dolly while the hot tub is on its edge for clarification. Laying it down isn't that hard. You tilt it, bring it down to your lap, grab the strap securing it to the dolly, and lower it to the deck. It's very controlled, and I've done it thousands of times. However, this deck wasn't finished, so the contractor wanted to leave it on its edge. It's a lot harder to take it off when it is standing up because the dolly is under a 900-pound tub. But I've done it before. I told them that we would have to put blocks under one side of the dolly, tilt the tub, and pop the straps to release the dolly, so it could be removed from the area. Then you tilt the hot tub back, remove the blocks, and then set the hot tub down on the deck. Problem: the deck wasn't wide enough to allow me to do this safely. I popped the strap on the hot tub, put the blocks under, and I tilted the hot tub, but that put me with my feet 4 inches from the edge of the deck, with nothing but 4 stories of air behind me. We were able to free the dolly on one side, but not the other. The hot tub had to be leaned over further toward me. I tell everyone to freeze, and they do. I didn't want anyone messing with it because I had to shift my feet back 5 inches so my heels were off the deck. I'm freaking out, but it's all going smoothly. I have a construction worker on each side of me helping support the tub, 3 construction workers freeing the dolly, and 1 useless worker playing with the strap that is going to secure the tub to the house so that the wind doesn't blow the tub over. We are inches from having the dolly freed when one of the construction workers freeing the dolly gets impatient and kicks the corner of the tub to dislodge it from the dolly. It works for him, but unfortunately for me, I didn't have my feet set yet. I shout that I'm falling. The 2 guys beside me take the weight of the tub, but no one can get to me. My arms are windmilling. I'm bent almost double backwards, trying my damnedest to stay on the deck. I can see the boulders down below out of the corner of my eye. I'm falling, and there isn't anything I can do about it. I feel myself go.
I'm falling.
My heels slip out from under me, and no one can reach me, but then suddenly, I'm flying forward. Something is under the small of my back, and it is slamming me into the bottom of the tub. The dolly was removed, and the tub stood up with me hugging it before I found out what saved me. The useless guy playing with the strap had already secured one end to the house. When I fell, the strap was already behind me, hanging off the deck. The construction worker pulled it tight with all his might, arresting my fall. It wasn't there for that purpose, but he saved my life that day. I would have been dead if not for him. I thanked him by sending him and his wife and kid to Breckenridge, Colorado for Christmas. It was actually a vacation I'd saved for and was about to surprise my wife and daughter with, but I felt he deserved it more. Plus, my wife and daughter didn't know anything about it. Yeah, that was one of my scariest moments ever. TLDR, fell off a 4th floor deck, but a construction worker saved me at the last moment, so I rewarded him with a vacation to Breckenridge, Colorado. Story 10. This is not supernaturally creepy, but is one of the more disturbing and surreal experiences of my life. One early morning a few short years ago, I was walking to my bus stop and eating a banana. It is dark, misty, around 5 a.m., and I am internally debating something trivial, like if I want my daily Starbucks before or after the commute. As I approach the dimly lit corner on my street, a tall man in a black mask steps out of the dark alleyway to my left. Sleepy and disoriented, I barely acknowledge him. When he shouts, "Put down your fucking purse," and points his gun to my head, things start to click. The man says, "Put down your bags," and I tell him, Okay, I'm putting them down over here." He orders me to walk over to him, toward the alley, and get down on the fucking ground, and I agree. I'm coming. Okay. My heart is beating 1,000,000 miles a minute, and my hands still smell sticky with bananas. I know I need to get away. I don't know why, but my mouth won't stop working. Look, see, I'm on the ground. My stuff is over there. Please just take my stuff, but he doesn't like it. Shut the fuck up, okay? He gets on top of me and puts the gun to my head. At this point, I should mention the fact that I'm on my way to coach a high school practice and I'm dressed like a dude.
Huge baggy pants, hat, jacket.
If not for my telltale voice, I'd look like a prepubescent 90s rap star. Anyway, as the guy gets on top of me, gun to my head, he looks at me and pauses. I can't tell you why I know this, but I swear that at this moment, it clicks for him that I'm a woman. He gets off of me, stands up, and points to the dark alley. Come with me. My stomach hurts. I remember that there have been a recent rash of sexual assaults in my neighborhood, during the daytime no less. When the man points down that dirty alleyway, my internal voice speaks the fuck up. Says, voice number 1, there was no way in hell you are going to go down there without a fight. But he has a gun, you dipshit, replies voice number 2. Fucking follow me. The real voice, his voice hollers. So I do what I do best, I talk. I'm coming, I'm following you. I called, and the man makes a crucial mistake. He believes me. I take 1, 2 tiny steps backwards toward the sidewalk, and he turns his body and his gun toward the alley. This is my moment. I take a deep breath, tuck my head down in case he starts shooting, and start sprinting away. I hear a voice screaming in a high-pitched wail before I realize that it's mine. After running 6 or 7 blocks, I head back to my apartment, hoping he's not there to see where I lived. The police check out the alleyway an hour later, but the potential attacker is long gone. The only evidence of the encounter is my banana peel browning in the alleyway and the adrenaline rush that I couldn't shake for days. I would be lying if I said that if that experience doesn't bother me still, but I'm so fortunate to mainly be haunted by the what-ifs and not the what-dids. Story 11. A week after gaining my CPR certification, I had to try and perform CPR on a woman dying of a heroin, probably other drugs too, overdose. I was at a thrift store with some friends looking for Halloween costumes, and someone came in saying that someone passed out in the parking lot. I was in the dressing room, and it just got super quiet. So I came out and told them I was certified and I'd go take a look and that they needed to call 911. I go outside and don't see anyone on the ground. Someone comes out and shouts that the person is in the car that's parked far out by itself. I ran over and honestly freaked the fuck out. She was pretty much already dead, completely blue in the face, slumped against her car window. She had the red druggy rings around her eyes, but those were blue too because she was so oxygen deprived. We opened the door, and I'll never forget that when we turned her head to see if she still had a pulse, she had tears running down her face. We pulled her out of the car, put her on the ground, and took her pulse again because the first person to do it wasn't sure. We started CPR, and the ambulance arrived about a minute after. They got her strapped up and in and continued CPR. They had another ambulance come, and those EMTs got out, and there were literally like 6 of them surrounding her. The cop told us they had administered some type of drug that can apparently reverse heroin overdoses if given in time, but she was pretty much dead already. They would do the necessary stuff until they could get to the hospital and call it, according to him. I also remember when we opened the door, there were heroin needles and empty pill bottles all over the floor. She wasn't very old. We also think she had kids. She had some toys and a car seat, plus 2 names tattooed on her. Edit. Wow. Thank you guys so much for the responses and the gold. It was definitely a tough situation, but for being 19 at the time, I think I handled it well. Story 12. Back in 2004, I was a young / dumb 17-year-old country girl in the city for the first time for college. One night I decided I could totally safely walk back to my dorm at around 1:30 in the morning despite not really knowing where I was. Of course, I instantly end up wandering around a terrible part of the city. Most of the streetlights are busted out, trash everywhere, loud arguments from inside the dilapidated as fuck row houses. In short, I wouldn't even want to be here in the middle of the day. A car drives up behind me and slows down, so they're keeping pace with me for nearly an entire block. I look over, and there are 5 unsavory-looking men inside. By this point, I was approaching an intersection, and they pull up, made a left, and stopped in the street directly in my path. Motherfuck. I completely panic at this point and just stand there, right in front of them. My mind went completely blank. I've never been that scared in my life. It didn't even make sense to try to run because they would have caught me without question. I'm not really sure how long I stood there, but suddenly the porch light in the house just past the car came on. Dude casually strolls outside carrying a bag of trash, and car peels away. I completely break down crying and shaking. Dude spots me and listens to my probably incoherent story, takes me inside and gives me a soda. Then he and his roommate walk me back to my dorm. They were both lovely and invited me to check out their stand-up sometime, but unfortunately I was too young to get into a bar. I never saw them again, don't even remember their names, but feel pretty confident that if that guy hadn't decided to take his trash out at 1 a.m. on a Saturday, my life would have taken a really shitty turn that night. Edit. I completely accept that this was totally my fault and a horribly dumb thing to do. I was extremely fortunate and am no longer that stupid. Story 13. My mother told me this not too long ago, but it happened about 10 years ago now. When my cousin was 18 years old, she was in a car crash and died a couple of weeks later in hospital. She was really close to my dad's sister, our aunt, and used to babysit her kids, who were no older than 4 years old, all the time. Our aunt's house was under construction just before she passed away, and it continued on after she passed away. One day my aunt got a phone call while she was at work from one of the construction workers complaining about a teenage girl who keeps showing up at the house and walking around, and that she shows up a number of times during the weeks, and it has been happening for a couple of weeks. My aunt asks for a description of the girl to see if she knows her from around the neighborhood, and sure enough the description perfectly matches my cousin who died a few weeks before. Long brown hair, red baseball cap, denim dungarees, and a white jacket. When my aunt got home, she showed them a picture of my cousin, and they all agreed that it was the girl they saw walking around the site. This story really freaked me out when I heard it because our family was never one to believe in anything paranormal or have anything of the paranormal sort happen to them before. When I was in high school, I had a really good friend who lived next door to a house that was always up for sale. People would move out in the middle of the night without a word, and it hadn't had the same owner for more than 6 months straight for a couple of years. One night we were really bored, and he suggested we go explore the house next door, since it had sat empty for a while. We go around back, and there's a dog door that he can crawl through, and he unlocks the door and lets me in. The house itself is really unremarkable. It looked like it was built in maybe the 1950s and was a craftsman-style house in an older, nicer part of town. My friend's house was similarly built. The kitchen had a really nice built-in breakfast table set against a picture window. The house's electricity was off, but you could see the street light through the window. My friend and I sit down on the floor across from this table and are just hanging out, talking. Why? Who knows? All of a sudden, my friend screams, and in that instant, my vision goes black. But it wasn't that I just couldn't see. My body was engulfed in this sickly coldness from head to toe. I start screaming, and I feel my friend's hand grabbing mine and pulling me in some direction forcefully. My vision slowly comes back and I start to warm up when I realize that we're outside under the streetlight. It was December and should have been much warmer inside of that house. Finally, I look at my friend and he looks scared. I'm really confused and kind of panicked and finally asked him what happened. He says that as I was talking, a black thing. This figure that was all black and only had the vague shape of a girl crawled out from under the table and sat on top of me. Apparently, I started groping around with my eyes wide open, like I couldn't see, and he was so freaked out he pulled me out of the house. We're still friends and we bring it up every now and then, but the story itself never changes and it still sends chills down my spine. To this day, I've never felt such blackness or coldness in my life. It was palpable, almost sticky. For a couple of days afterward, I couldn't shake this unsettling feeling, and I could never walk past that house again. I'm scared to get out of bed now. Story 14. Every time I stay at my grandma's house, I hear someone walking upstairs. It starts at one side of the room, casually walks to the other and stops. This will happen maybe twice a night. I didn't start hearing it until I was about 14, when my grandparents made me start sleeping in a different room on the first floor because they started sleeping in separate bedrooms. Blah, blah, blah. Regardless, both of their rooms are also on the first floor. For a little backstory, I have always been afraid of the upstairs at their house. I don't know why, but it's always freaked me out, and I refuse to ever go up there alone. I'm 23 now, still won't go up alone. There's one room specifically, though. It's a long, narrow bedroom. When you open the door, there are closets on your left and right, a bed placed roughly in the middle of the room, and a window on the far side opposite the door. I was told growing up by my grandparents that the sons of the previous owner claimed to see a gorilla come out of the closet at night, dance around the room, and go back into the closet. I thought nothing of this story until I had to start sleeping in the other room, the room located directly below the scary room upstairs. So, we all went to bed. All the lights in the house are off and I'm still awake, lying on the bed. Then I heard it. Thump, 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 starting at one end of the room upstairs. It got closer to me, passed right above me, and continued to the end of the room, where it stopped. I'm wide awake, terrified out of my mind. It was no question to me that I had heard footsteps. I knew that slow, casual pace. I was freaked out and went to my grandpa's room. I told him what I heard. He told me that the house is old and it creaks. But he turned the dining room light on for me, so I felt a little safer. I tried going back to sleep. Then it started again, this time from where it ended the first time, by the window upstairs. It walks over me again and stops when it reaches the door. I thought it was over until 5 seconds later when I heard it coming down the stairs. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 silence as it reached the landing. Then 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And silence again as it reached the first floor. I was frozen in shock. Whatever it was on my floor of the house, and sadly unaffected by the dining room light. I was staring at the doorway to my room. The dining room light was shining in, and my vision began to distort. I felt dizzy with fear, so I pulled the blankets over my head and suddenly heard a scratching sound from inside my room. I knew exactly where it was coming from, too, my grandpa's gun case. It was a very obvious sound. Scratching on the wood. Long scratches down the front of the gun case door. I could even hear the door ever so slightly tapping against the frame as each scratch began. I tried to scream and I couldn't. I took a second to take a deep breath and let out a loud scream. In seconds, my grandpa had made it to my room and I was relieved. Needless to say, he still didn't believe me. So I did what any normal person would do. I draped a sheet over the side of the bed and slept underneath it. I wrapped myself tight in a comforter, put on headphones, and turned my back to the door. There could be a party of ghosts in my room and I wouldn't even know. The next morning, my grandpa told my grandma about what happened the night before. She said, "Oh, that's silly. You know, your cousin woke me up the last time she stayed here. She came in my room saying, 'I hear footsteps.' I slept under the bed for the rest of my week stay with them. I've stayed there countless times since that happened, and I hear footsteps every time. I sleep on top of the bed now, but keep my back to the door and sleep with headphones on. I haven't heard it come down the stairs since that first night, but if it does, I don't want to know. Edits because I'm bad at writing and I can't stay in the same tense." Story 15. When I was about 7, my 2 brothers and I were playing in an area that was used as an unofficial motocross place. We decided to dig a tunnel for some reason, being the extra smart guys we were. It took a few hours to dig about 6 feet in and 2 feet high. I was right up at the face when suddenly the tunnel collapsed. It was all dirt with no supports. My world went instantly black and hot. By hot, I mean furnace hot. I couldn't move a muscle from the weight of the soil completely enclosing me. I started to really panic, as you do. Everything started turning red, which I guess was blood being forced into my head. Every breath was getting harder as the soil constrained me more and more. Even though my hands were near my face, I couldn't move my arms to clear the dirt around my head, and also started breathing in dirt, which made me cough, which made me contract my stomach, and then I couldn't draw breath at all. This isn't what made me panic, though. The total darkness turning red with the incredible heat made my young mind think I was going to hell. I don't know how long I was buried for, but it seemed like an eternity. Suddenly, I felt something grab one of my feet. My brothers had been frantically digging through the collapse to pull me out and managed to reach me and then pull me out. We never told my parents. I just went home and got hosed down. TLDR, got buried alive and pissed myself. Story 16. When we first moved into the house I grew up in, I used to hear things calling my name from the opposite end of the house. Like, I would be in my room playing with Legos or something, and I would hear my dad call my name from his room. So I'd go to my parents' bedroom and ask them what they wanted, and they'd always tell me that they never called my name. Being a little kid, I honestly started to think that they were playing a joke on me, because this happened about once every couple of days. Well, one night it happened, and I went to ask them what they wanted, like always. But right as I stepped into their room, I heard my mom's voice calling for me from the living room, which is all the way on the other side of the house. It was at that exact point that I knew no one was tricking me because I was looking at both of my parents sitting in front of me. I kinda kept this to myself until my brother was diagnosed with partial narcolepsy. One of the symptoms of narcolepsy is apparently oral hallucinations, so I thought maybe I had it too. Went and got myself checked. Completely fine. So I have no idea what was calling my name all those years, and I still hear it at night whenever I come visit and stay over. Story 17. Okay, this is 100% true. I'm 23 now, and this happened about 10 years ago, so I was probably 13 or 14. Anyway, I used to skate, board, all the time with my friends Tim and Brandon. One day, we got done skating and we decided to go to July 11th to get some food/drinks before we went home. Remember, I was only 13 to 14, so we weren't driving. We had skated on July 11th and were planning on skating/walking back home. Anyway, we bought our drinks and we left the store. We walked to the parking lot's exit and prepared to cross the highway. It's not a bused highway since it's a small town. While we waited for the traffic light to turn red so that we could cross, I looked behind me at the 7-Eleven gas pumps. I noticed a 40 to 50-year-old man pumping gas into his white truck. He stared at me, and before I knew it, he dropped the gas pump and jumped into his truck. He slammed on the gas and sped straight at my friends and I. He missed us, but he grazed my arm and knocked my skateboard out of my hand. My friend, Brandon, screamed, "WTF, you fucking dick," as the man peeled out and sped into the parking lot next to July 11th. I swear to God, he drove through a ditch, which was between July 11th's parking lot and the parking lot he was in, and tried to run us over again. This is where it got bad. The three of us started running at full speed, across the highway and toward the local library, which is like 2 to 3 blocks from 7-Eleven. When we were about 1/2 a block away, I looked back and saw the maniac speeding toward us, full of rage. Brandon and Tim ran up to the library doors and I ran towards the woods. It was Sunday, so I knew the library was closed and there was a trail in the woods which led to my backyard. Meanwhile, this maniac peeled into the parking lot and hopped out of his truck. I looked behind me before escaping into the woods and saw him grab either a shotgun or a crowbar. I was pretty far away at this point, and I was freaking out so my vision wasn't great from the bed of his truck. I ran all the way home. When I got to my street, my neighbor, Tim's dad, told me to get in his car because we had to go to the video store, which is where Tim's mom worked. When I got there, I found Tim and Brandon. They ran to the video store after realizing that the library was closed and 3 cops. A minute later, my mom came in, crying her eyes out because Brandon and Tim told her they didn't know if I lived or not. Everyone had thought that I was captured. Tim told me that he saw the guy running after me into the woods, which is scary because I thought the maniac was chasing them, not me. Anyway, he was never caught, and I spent the next 5 years worrying about every white truck I saw. Edit. I forgot the most scary part. My town is small, but it's not empty. There were plenty of people around while this was going on. I felt so helpless, running for my life, while there were at least 100 people around, not doing anything about it. Also, to be clear, we didn't provoke this man at all. He tried to hit us for no reason, and that's creepy. Brandon called him a dick, but that was after he tried to run us over. We were good kids, trying to walk home, and we almost died/got seriously hurt because of it. Also, bust highways are busy highways. Woke up. Clock says 3:34 a.m. I'm 17 and in my bedroom. It's pitch black, but I hear some rattling downstairs. Terrified, I quietly tiptoe to my parents' room. Weird, it's empty. Where are my parents at 3:34 a.m.? Go upstairs to my brother's room. He's usually awake all night, but while the light is on, no one is in the room. So I guess whatever those noises are downstairs, it must be them. Why are they awake? Maybe someone died? In the middle of my living room is what looks like 2 men stealing our TV. No one else is in sight. I run upstairs as quietly as possible, shut and lock my door. Suddenly, there's banging on the door. I woke up. It was a dream and the relief washes over me. I look over at the clock. Weird coincidence. It's 3:34 a.m. I'm shaking, but decide to go downstairs to prove to myself that everything's fine. The 2 men are in my kitchen, screaming at my parents and brother. I run upstairs to my bedroom and lock the door. 10 seconds later, I hear banging. I woke up. It's 3:34 a.m. This time, I had actually woken up and I didn't manage to fall back asleep for about 36 hours. Edit. Lots of responses about lucid dreaming here. I spent most of my teens and early 20s as a lucid dreamer, discovering the techniques after a childhood plagued by very frightening sleep paralysis. I found a message board back in 1998 where I learned to at least have fun with it. The above story wasn't a sleep paralysis experience, but it was typical of the kinds of nightmares I used to have. Weirdly enough, I rarely have nested dreams anymore and haven't had a successful attempt at lucid dreaming in a few years. My guess is that it has something to do with hormones. Story 18. I lived in a bizarre little house as a child. It was incredibly tall and thin, like an attached house except freestanding, with 3 floors, a basement, and an attic. It was full of quirks, such as 2 fully functional fireplaces, a shower stall in the center of the basement, a backyard so small that you could not take 5 paces without hitting the fence, and an old-timey rope-pull dumbwaiter that led from the kitchen to my bedroom. I loved that weird little place, but unfortunately it was incredibly old, and half of its charm was the fact that it seemed to have been designed by an inarticulate conclave of lunatics, and eventually the repair costs exceeded what my parents were willing to sink into it, and we had to move. Preparing for the move was a chore. I packed most of my stuff myself, and I had taken to throwing stuff down the dumbwaiter and shoving all my clothes so thickly in my closet that they became a single, solid brick of fabric. While clearing that closet out, in fact, I came across a feature I hadn't noticed before: an attic entrance in the roof. Being an adventurous kid, I opened her up, stood on the clothes brick, and began my first and last exploration into the topmost part of our weird little house. The first thing I noticed was that it wasn't as dark as it should have been. The place was strung with old, red Christmas lights which still burned with leftover incandescence, and a dozen little cracks and holes peeped down into all the bedrooms below. The second thing I noticed was that the place was set up for habitation. The insulation was plasticed away, there was an old gurney piled with sleeping bags and sheets, and a rusted mint green refrigerator which still worked when I tested it. The third thing was the bones. There were a lot of bones. I was a kid at the time, with a limited understanding of anatomy, but there were bones of all types heaped into a series of piles around the center of the attic. Small and large, clean and white, from every and any imaginable sort of creature, haphazardly stacked in a half-dozen osseous clumps. 2 of them were blackened, as if someone had tried to burn them, and the walls nearest those blackened piles were scrawled in dark bone char messages. Mostly they were just smears, but the word sorry appeared more than once. That room had been sitting over my head for 8 years while I slept. Story 19. So, my uncle used to work a lot when I was younger. He's done a lot of different things to make money, but one consistent thing is that in the summer months and into late fall he paints houses. It's a legitimate business and everything. He's got a truck with a number and a name and supplies in the back, the works. Every now and then he would call my dad when he needed a little extra help and I'd work for him. No big deal. Really, it's just painting houses. What could possibly go wrong? Well, it takes a while to paint a whole house. If the weather conditions aren't right, then you can't paint. One particular fall was extremely wet. It rained what felt like every single day. My uncle would paint multiple houses at a time, so sometimes he would get caught up due to situations like these, and I'd work a little more than usual. That was fine by me, though. The job wasn't hard and it paid well. Anyway, it was a warm day for late fall, but there was still a distinct chill in the air. One that kinda penetrated through you and stung your soul. My uncle had this job he had to finish. It was an old Victorian house in a quiet part of town. A lady and her husband, who was an author, lived there. Due to the weather, it had taken longer than expected to paint the house, and there were family issues going on at the time, which further complicated things. So, my uncle gets a call one day from the lady who lives at the house. She says that her husband is trying to write his next book, but he keeps getting distracted by the scaffolding outside the house, so she wanted to know if we could come over and finish the job as soon as possible. My uncle was always an honest businessman. They had contracted him to do the job in midsummer, but he had lots of jobs that summer, and the wet conditions I mentioned above made it difficult to finish anything. However, these people were insistent but really polite, And not wanting to lose customers or get a bad recommendation, my uncle decided to put the house as a high priority. After all, it would only take a day or two to finish. So, we show up to this house mid-afternoon. Like I said, it was a weird kind of chilly that day, and I also remember a really eerie calm. The day was slightly overcast, so everything was shrouded in gray. It was like the perfect setting for a mystery crime novel. So we arrive at this house, and my uncle and I move to the back. The front of the house was already done, so there was nothing left there. My uncle, being the more experienced painter, would always do the touch-ups, and I would simply apply the first coats, since they took little skill. Anyway, we get to the back of the house, and he asks me if I'm scared of heights. I was 17 at the time, and although they did creep me out a little, I didn't want to seem like a child in front of my uncle, so I told him I wasn't. He was happy to hear that. He has me climb up the scaffold to the 3rd floor to finish an upper section of the house. There was a window up there, a small little oval one that looked into the attic. The attic also happened to be the husband's study. He would do most of his writing there. So, I'm climbing up this scaffolding, cans of paint dangling behind me, and various paint brushes and other tools in the utility belt my uncle let me borrow. I get to the top of the scaffolding and set all my supplies down. I crack open a can of paint and start painting like I had a few hundred times before. Outside of the temperature, the overcast, and the eerie calm this day was like any other. I'm working my way across the top part of the house when I get to the window that looks into the study. I bend down, dip my paintbrush, and stand back up to paint above the window. The window was in my direct line of sight, and I couldn't help gazing in. I see a man, the husband, staring back at me with a face completely barren of any emotion. I had never seen a face so devoid of feeling before. I still haven't. Of course, I get startled and take a step back. I chuckle and smile at the guy, but he doesn't smile back. Instead, while remaining completely emotionless, he draws a pistol up to his head that he was holding in his hand the whole time and proceeds to blow his brains out, without breaking eye contact, right in front of me, while I'm staring at him. In utter shock, I gasp and let out the smallest scream as I step back in fear. Only, I stepped back a step too much and fell off the scaffolding. Alerted by the gunshot, my uncle looked up in just enough time to see me fall off the scaffolding from the 3rd story. I was lucky enough to land in a bush and only suffer a broken ankle and a few scratches. The biggest wounds happened in my head. I had to go to counseling for a while. It's been years since then, and I still remember that man's face. I've never forgotten it. It will always be burned in the back of my head. I know why, looking back, his face was so devoid of emotion, because he never felt any emotion at all. He literally didn't care about what he was doing. As it turns out, the man was seriously depressed and facing marital issues with his wife. Combined with a few too many nights drunk on whiskey and facing writer's block, I guess he decided he couldn't take it anymore. His wife moved out of the house shortly after, and we never finished the job. To this day, that house remains abandoned, and to this day, I try not to drive down the street it's on. I'm scared that if I do and happen to pass the backyard, I'll see that man staring back at me from that window, cold and emotionless. Story 20. When I was 8, my family moved from urban South Florida to a really small town in North Florida. It was like something from a Goosebumps book. A lot of weird stuff has happened in the 15 years since we moved there, but the weirdest has got to be when my sister moved back in with my parents. My sister's husband had been shipped off to Afghanistan, so she was left alone with a newborn son. Not wanting to go through the soul-crushing loneliness of raising a newborn all alone in a trailer in the woods, she moved back into my parents' house for a while. She said it started first when the headboard of her bed would slam every now and then. Then one day she woke up, because somebody was tickling her. She didn't really think about it until one night she woke my mom up by screaming, "My sister is almost 30, she's not a little kid." And my mom went in and the whole fucking bed was rocking and shaking like, really violently up down, to the sides, like a boat going through white water. But my mom and sister have been through a lot of shit, so they persevered. One night my sister was nursing her son and something grabbed her ponytail and started yanking her head around. My mom went into the room and very sternly, like talking to a bad kid, said, "I understand things are different. There's a little baby here and there never has been before. You're curious, I understand that, but you will not touch them anymore. You can look, you can stay. You were here before us, but I swear to God you are not allowed to touch them." It stopped happening. Story 21. About a month ago, I went over to my girlfriend's house. Except I felt really uneasy when I went into the living room. Turns out, they replaced a china cabinet with one of her grandmothers who passed away a few months back. Her grandmother was bedridden in the hospital, and I've ever gotten to meet her. I felt uneasy the whole time. Being around her grandmother's furniture made me so anxious and almost sad. When I told her, she said it was probably nothing. She went to the bathroom. When I went over to the cabinet, it was about 6 feet tall, dark wood. It had 2 doors on the side and glass up front, and in the back was a mirror. I was looking at the teacups and small baby dolls when I could swear I saw someone in the mirror behind me, just a silhouette. I called out to my girlfriend, but as I did, I heard a shrill screech from the bathroom. I start pounding on the door, and it opens. She was sitting on the floor, crying. She said she saw someone in the bathroom mirror. We booked it out of her house. I dove for an hour or so, with no destination. When I returned her to her house, her mom was sitting on the doorstep. She said she kept seeing shadows move. I will go out of my way to make things like this happen. Someone claims their house is haunted, I want to see. Someone said they think they saw a skinwalker. My friends are looking. I've never found anything. But this was something else. Story 22. I was on the Manassas battlefield with my father when I was younger. We were sitting on the back of his tailgate eating McDonald's on top of a hill looking at some cannons. It was foggy and misty out that day with a slight chill, November I think. All of the sudden, we see a man dressed in full Civil War attire waving at us standing by the cannons, about 50 to 100 meters away. My dad had a pair of binoculars with him and we got a closer look at the man. He appeared to be in a Confederate uniform and was standing stationary, only moving his arm to wave. It was a "come here" wave. My dad thought there was a reenactment going on and that the man needed help. So my dad walked down to the man while I watched with the binoculars. When my dad got close to the man, he stopped walking and had a confused posture. After a couple seconds next to the man, he turns around and sprints back to me. He proceeds to throw everything in the back of the truck and we leave the battlefield in a hurry. My dad said while walking down there, the man slowly disappeared, and my dad said he got the strangest feeling in his stomach and mad chills. To this day, my dad gets the chills and goosebumps telling the story. My dad saw combat in Vietnam, so he is not an easy guy to scare. From my perspective, my dad was right next to the guy and never disappeared. We don't know what we saw, but I think it was a ghost. TLDR, I think we saw a ghost of a Confederate soldier. Story 23. When I was a child, I lived in an old Victorian house, and I would always hear laughing while I was trying to sleep. I was an only child with a single mother, and when I was about 5 to 6, I would wake up hearing laughter in the hallway in the middle of the night. After mentioning this to my mom, She swore it was probably just the TV being left on late. One night, I awoke hearing the laughter in my room. I went to sit up, but felt like there was someone holding my shoulders down, invisible hands gripping into my shoulders while I heard laughing. I screamed my little heart out. My mom ran into my room, flicking on the bedside lamp, convincing me it was just a dream, until I said, "But my shoulders hurt." She lifted up my t-shirt and there were 2 adult-sized handprints on my shoulders. I honestly thought I had imagined it and that it had never happened, but the other day I mentioned it in passing to my mom and she went blanket white and said, "I don't want to remember that."